Hi, my name is Dr. Felucia. I'm a licensed psychologist and owner of Skill Set Counseling, where I focus on the treatment of OCD, spiritual abuse, and cultural abuse. Today's video is going to be on the topic of spiritual abuse, specifically how to deal with guilt when setting boundaries in your spiritually abusive environment. This is a topic that I encounter frequently in my work with individuals who are in the process of recovering from spiritual abuse. And so in this video, I'm going to explain why you feel guilty and what you can do about it. Okay, so many survivors of spiritual abuse often feel guilty about setting boundaries in response to the spiritual abuse that they faced. They're told by the spiritually abusive environment or spiritually abusive people that they are bitter, that they're unforgiving, they're selfish, or that they're just out for revenge, or something like even that they're immature. I'm wondering if you have been through spiritual abuse. Have you ever heard this? And how did you deal with that? I'd love to hear about that in the comments. Okay. But the result of hearing these messages as you are trying to set boundaries is that it can make you feel damaged inside. It can make you feel that you can't go forward and set the boundaries that you need to go forth and do. And so basically, you might make a decision that you're going to set a boundary in a certain area, but because you keep hearing these messages, you feel guilty, or you just kind of go through, the motions with the boundaries, but you don't really set forth any stringent rules, and you don't follow through on what you're going to say or what you're going to do rather. So this is a common response in individuals who have had these messages or these accusations rather hurled at them. So first of all, when you hear these messages, don't be surprised. Number one, don't be surprised that you're feeling guilty about experiencing. Don't feel guilty, number one, or don't feel surprised, rather, about the guilt you're feeling in response to setting up boundaries to your spiritual abusers. And the reason why I say this is because if you think about the spiritually abusive environment and how it works, and I have several videos on my spiritual abuse playlist about this. The spiritually abusive environment thrives on control. And if you don't remember anything else from this video or my other videos, remember that spiritually abusive people and the spiritually abusive environment thrive on control. And so when you set up boundaries, what you are saying, the message that you're communicating is, no, this control is not okay with me. I value my own autonomy and free will. And so when that happens, a spiritually abusive environment thriving on control sees your boundaries as a threat. And they're going to come back and accuse you of being immature, being bitter, or being only out for revenge and things like that. And so this is going to be something that should be expected. After all, you're in a spiritually abusive environment or trying to leave one or in the process of leaving one, and they thrive on control. And so it is important to examine yourself and deal with feelings of bitterness, unforgiveness, and revenge, and things like that. And those are common desires for revenge, feeling bitter, having a difficult time forgiving. Those are all part of what comes with spiritual abuse for many people. And I encourage you to process that through prayer and, whatever works for you. For some people, it's prayer. For some people, it's therapy. Whatever things that you need to do to help you with that inner work to deal with these, it's really important. But that doesn't negate the fact that boundaries are still important. And so, don't be surprised when this accusation is hurled at you by the spiritually abusive environment. It's really important to remember too, and I talk about this in my other videos about spiritual abuse, that that authenticity is not as important to the spiritually abusive environment as appearance. And so because of that, you have to look at what the spiritually abusive environment does instead of what they say. And they can say all these things like, we value people's individuality and all these other values that they can tout, but you want to make sure that you're looking at what they are actually doing. And I've heard countless stories of people when they try to set up boundaries in response to spiritual abuse, they get these accusations hurled at them. This is a normal response from a spiritually abusive environment when they fear that they are losing control. Because remember, as I've said before, spiritually abusive environments thrive on control. Okay. By the way, if you're finding this content helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you like, subscribe, and share these videos. What that does, it helps get this information out to those, let's say yourself, who will likely benefit from the information I'm giving you. So again, just take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with others that you think might find this helpful. Really appreciate it, and thank you. So the second point I want to make is that boundaries are essential to healing from spiritual abuse, okay? But it's also important to understand why we are setting those boundaries and do the inner work and process through, why am I setting this boundary? It doesn't have to be a very long process. You just have to remember that you don't want to become controlling in response to control, right? And so the spiritually abusive environment acts to control you. So if you are setting up a boundary in response to try and control someone else's behavior, while that's understandable, it's only going to backfire. It's not going to help you feel any better. And you don't want to mimic and adopt the behaviors of the spiritually abusive environment that you are extracting yourself from. So that is really important. And one way I would suggest that you can examine this is just by making a list of not of why you're making the boundaries, and not only what you don't want, like what you're trying to block out from the boundaries, but also what you want to gain from setting up the boundaries. So let's just give an example. Let's say you're in a spiritually abusive system where they respond to your no through just more manipulative and more controlling behavior. And you'll understand what I mean by this if you go back to some of my other videos on spiritual abuse. One way that you can that spiritually abusive people and environments behave is that they don't respond to your no very well. So let's just imagine for a second that you're in an environment, you're getting lots of manipulative, just controlling, like even threatening emails, right? And so before, your response may have been to try and explain yourself in emails, explain why you don't want to comply with a certain request or just all these things. But you decided, you know what? My boundary now is that I'm not going to respond. And so when you do that, you have to understand that even when you set up that boundary, you can't control what the other person is doing, right? You may hope that, okay, they may not send you any more emails, but really they may go to other means to try and control you. And so it's really important that you understand that your boundaries are there for you. What are you trying to gain from this boundary? For you, it may be peace of mind. It may be increased time that you're not spending going back and forth with someone about why you are or not going to do something. Whatever that is, make sure that you take inventory of not only what you want to block out, but what you want to gain from those boundaries, and understand again, we're not here to control other people. Have you ever heard of that, heard this phrase, wherever you go, there you are? So think about that with spiritual abuse. You don't want to leave your spiritually abusive environment only to adopt those same controlling behaviors that made it so abusive and just difficult to be in. And so you really want to relinquish that control and understand why you are doing what you're doing. Okay. And so again, guilt is just part of the package with setting boundaries. When I work with people with this, it's not something that they just jump to overnight and say, oh, great, I feel wonderful with doing this. Because again, we can't control or predict what other people are doing. So the point of this is, yes, you're still going to feel guilt, and that's okay. The important thing is working through that guilt and understanding that just because you feel guilty about something doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong or you need to stop. Sometimes that guilt can be conditioned into you from having so many spiritually abusive experiences. And through therapy, you will learn how to work through that guilt, to sort through it, to try and figure out, okay, what do I need to do in response? Instead of just shutting down and not doing anything because you feel guilty, which is a common response to spiritual abuse. Okay, so for more tips on setting boundaries in spiritual abusive environments, or if you just want help through this journey, head on over to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, where you can book a complimentary consultation with me. You can also click on the link in the description box to do the same thing. I know this is tough, setting boundaries, but I just encourage you to hang in there, and you've got this, okay? So I hope you have a wonderful day filled with peace and joy. Bye-bye.